Joining us for this month's Wednesday webinar, sponsored by the education team at the Finance Authority of Maine. In this webinar titled The Impact and Importance of Scholarships, we'll be discussing why scholarships have become increasingly important to student success. We'll also take a look at some of the challenges that arise when students are awarded these scholarships, and what different students can do to minimize the impact around being awarded scholarships. My name is Jessica Whittier, and I'm a college access counselor here at FAME, and I will be your host for this final FAME webinar of the decade. Woohoo! Beginning in January of 2020, our Wednesday webinar series will continue with a new time. So we're going to begin them starting in January at 1 p.m. So they'll be in the afternoon versus in the morning, just checking to see if that is more convenient for more people. So we're going to try that for the remainder of the year. So stay tuned for more information about that webinar at the end of this presentation. So for today's presentation, for today's webinar, we're going to be talking about scholarships. I do want to preface this by saying this is a little bit different than scholarship presentations we have done in the past. So if you are looking for more information about how to find scholarships or how to motivate students to apply for scholarships, or how to look good when you're applying for scholarships, we have all of that stuff on our YouTube page previously recorded. So I did put some of them, the links in our chat, the chat section. But what I'm going to do is in the email follow-up you'll get to this presentation that would include the link to the recording. I'll try to put in those links to those additional scholarship presentations that you can share with students and families and take a look at yourself. But today's presentation is really going to talk more about the back end of what happens when students are awarded scholarships. So in creating this presentation, I knew what I wanted to kind of share. So I know that when I talk a lot with students and families about scholarships, and then inevitably some of them have an experience that they didn't expect, where a college might have to adjust a financial aid package, or come to find out they have to pay taxes on some of the scholarship that they were awarded, and they didn't quite understand that ahead of time. And it's not something we talk about a lot. So I really wanted to talk about what are those things that sometimes happen to students or around receiving scholarships. So that was the kind of the goal of this presentation. But I also didn't want to scare you guys and your students, because the reality is scholarships are still vitally important for most students when they go to college. So what I'm going to try to do today is I'm going to start by explaining why scholarships are important, why they are important for all different students. So we'll talk about that, and then we'll get into, once you've been awarded a scholarship, what happens next? How do colleges treat scholarships? What are those potential tax implications, and what can scholarship providers do to help? And so what can students ask from scholarship providers or discuss? Now, not all scholarship providers are going to have discussions with you or change how they do things, but there are some that are willing to work with students to make it a little more useful. So we'll talk about that as well. So let's get started by talking about this need for scholarships. And I have a couple of statistics that I'm just going to talk a little bit about here because I thought they were pretty interesting. The first one is that between 2009 and the school year 2009-2010 and the 1920 school year, the increase in the average grant aid only covered about 15% of the increase in the tuition and fees for a full-time student at an in-state public four-year college or university. So this is the big piece. We know the cost of college is going up. But what we're not seeing is we're not seeing those need-based financial aid packages going up as quickly as the cost for college. So we are certainly seeing somewhat of an increase in those areas, but often not enough to make a huge difference for those students. So one of the things that we want to, really look at is how do we meet the need as the cost of college increases? How do we get more aid that students don't have to take out in student loans or take out of their own pocket? So certainly we know scholarships are one of the really great ways to do that. Also, just another statistic, in 2009, so the 1920 school year, full-time students at a public two-year college, and this is based on data from the across the US, so this is data that the College Board collected. Those students at two-year colleges are covering an average of $8,600 in room and board after grant aid, and in addition to paying for books and supplies and other living expenses. So, we're talking, once you add the rest of those things in, you're talking $9,000, $10,000 that students are taking on as their part of the kind of the burden of paying for college, or their part. For some families, certainly we'll talk about that might be a possibility, but for a lot of our families, especially our Maine students, that is not, a reality of what they're able to do. So how are we filling that need? How are students, if they're not getting the aid from the colleges themselves or from the federal government or the state of Maine, how are they meeting those needs? Again, scholarships are one of those ways where students are able to get some additional money to help fill those gaps, fill the difference between what they're able to pay and what they have to pay, so that they don't have to take out additional student loans. Potentially. So, or even after they've taken out their federal loan, they don't have to take out more. So those are the things we're looking at. How do we fill that gap? How do we meet their needs, meet them where they are? Another quick example for this kind of why we still think scholarships are really important is, this is an example of what the average cost for a four-year college around the U.S. is costing. So this is public institutions and private institutions. Just taking a look at that lower public university kind of band. Back in 2009, 4 years at a public university was going to cost you, it looks like, probably about $60,000 over 4 years. Today, if you take a look at the 2020 line, we are easily at $100,000 for 4 years at a four-year college. So that's a big chunk. That's a huge investment. And if we look at our private universities, those numbers go higher on average around the country. So the cost of college keeps going up. So we're talking, 3 to 4% per year. But the amount of aid that students are receiving is not going up at the same rate, not even nearly as quickly as the cost is. So we have this additional need. Now, this is happening for a bunch of different reasons, but one of them is we are seeing, a shift in the amount of public funds available to help students pay for college. So whether that's states funding their own in-state institutions or the federal government helping with grant costs and things like that, we are seeing the cost of education rising, and also a family's expected family contribution is rising. So how much a family is expected to pay for that education before they start receiving need-based aid. So let's talk. I think that's a big piece of what I want to talk about here, because I think that's an important part to this conversation. So that expected family contribution, we also call it an EFC. So you might see, I will probably refer to it as the EFC several times during this presentation, just so you know what I'm talking about. That expected family contribution is the amount of money that the government thinks that your family can afford to pay to put a student through college for 1 year. So it's that 1 year kind of what can you afford to pay. That number has certainly increased pretty dramatically over the last 10 to 15 years. But how it's increased, and we'll show you in a second, the higher incomes are getting, the more that the federal government or the colleges are expecting students have the ability to pay. So we'll take a look at that in just a second. But so what are they counting? When you look at this expected family contribution, You get this number when you complete your financial aid forms. So filling out the free application for federal student aid, the FAFSA, will get you an EFC. That number is then sent to all of the colleges you list on your FAFSA. So those schools are usually working all from the same number. That said, there are a handful of schools out there that have additional financial aid forms that they want students and families to complete. One of them in particular is the CSS profile. So some schools are looking at things a little bit differently or looking at more things, but the vast majority of colleges in the United States today are solely using the EFC from the FAFSA. So what is the FAFSA looking at? So the FAFSA considers, as part of their equation, household size, the number of kids in the household going to college, so the number of dependents in the household going to college at the same time, parent income and assets, student income and assets, and the age of the oldest parent in the household. So those are the primary factors that play into how the FAFSA determines your expected family contribution. For most Maine families, or for most Maine students that are dependents, we are seeing that parent income playing the larger role in this process. So they will look at other things as well. So they're going to look at student income, but students can earn up to $6,000 a year, and the federal government is not even going to look at that first $6,000. Anything over $6,000, however, then we're going to start looking at 50 cents on the dollar. It's like actually they can make up to like 6,600, something like that. So most of our high school students heading off to college for the first time are not making $6,000 a year, but our students that are in college sometimes do. So those longer summers where they might be working in the field that they're training for, we might actually see them, earning more money. So know that those things can hurt, but the vast majority of what we're seeing is parent income being the impact. Household size absolutely also makes a big difference. So the same households, you have two households that make the same income, but one has 2 or 3 more people in the household, you're going to see that expected family contribution be higher for the smaller household. And the number of kids in college makes a difference, because the expected family contribution is a household number. So the number that the FAFSA generates is a number for that household. If there's one student going to college at a time, then that entire expected family contribution is then going to be used by, or attributed to that one student going to college. Once you have 2 students going to college, that number gets split in half. So half of the EFC goes to one student, half of the EFC goes to another. So we can see those need-based aid numbers increase as your expected family contribution decreases. So the more kiddos going to college at the same time, the more a family can more aid a family can potentially qualify for. So I'm not going to get too much further into the meat and potatoes of this, but I do want to plug that we do have on our YouTube page, and again, I'll try to put it in the follow-up email to this presentation. And it's an older webinar on calculating EFC. So it's called an expected family contribution hand calculation. So there's a paper form out there that you can print, and you can go through it and put your information in line by line and really see what is that FAFSA looking at? What pieces are affecting a student's financial aid the most? So I actually think it's a really interesting presentation that's worth checking out. So I will make sure that we have that in the follow-up to this webinar. So determining this expected family contribution, understanding that the FAFSA is coming up with this number, and all the colleges are using the same number to generate financial aid. So this is important and to keep in mind as we move forward. This is a quick example of what some of those expected family contributions look like. So as I mentioned before, income plays the largest role. So I really did this based on income. So this is 4 families, family A, B, C, and D. They all have the same makeup. So they are a family of 4 with 2 parents and 2 children, and the oldest parent in the household is 46 years old. very, very young parent. I'm almost there. Okay. So what we're looking at here is what is their expected contribution solely based on their income. So a family, that family of four making $40,000 a year, their expected family contribution from income is $176. So I'm sure a family in that, situation would probably feel like, $176 is reasonable. But as income goes up, those numbers go up, what I would say is fairly dramatically. So family B making $60,000 a year has an expected family contribution of $3,547. So that's 6% of that family's household income is expected to be available to help them pay for college. Jump up to family C at 90,000, we're up to 11,000. That number, 11,000 certainly is knocking students out of qualifying for Pell Grant and other types of need-based aid. So and if you have two parents in the household working, making $45,000 each, you're hitting that $90,000 number. For a family D making $120,000, we're talking about more than a $20,000 expected family contribution, which makes up about 17% of their household income. And again, that is solely based on their income. We know that the FAFSA will also look at student income and assets and the assets of parents, although they play a smaller role. But solely based on income, we're talking about 17% of that household income. So that's a big chunk of what a family's bringing home in a year, being expected to go towards the cost of college. This is important to know. So this is one of the things that continues to, I think, challenge families is this expected family contribution is still expected from them when students go off to college. So, and again, whether or not the parents even intend to help students pay for college, this is the expectation on that family. So just to kind of show you, when we're looking at these numbers, I kind of pulled family C here and plugged them into how need is determined by colleges. So if you have a family or a student whose expected family contribution is $11,000, we've got 3 different colleges here that student could be going to. Again, the expected family contribution does not change just because the cost of the college changes. So in the first scenario, we have a college that's a little over $24,000 a year, so $24,500. You figure that the family, based on the EFC determined by the federal government, can afford $11,000. That means they need $13,500. So that first college is going to be trying to give the student $13,500. In the second scenario, we've got a lower cost college, and that the need there, the cost of college is $12,000. The EFC stays the same at $11,000. So at that particular college, the student's only going to need $1,000. In the last scenario, this is one of our higher priced colleges at $70,000 a year. Same expected family contribution. So that student's going to need $59,000 at that particular college. So that need number is the amount of need-based financial aid that colleges can offer students. So it's important to remember that that expected family contribution doesn't change, based on what school you're going to and things like that. So keep that in mind as we move forward. So the student need is the cost of college minus that expected family contribution. And that's going to be important as we kind of go forward. So how do scholarships work? So you need to pay the rest of the cost for college, or pay the total cost of college. So we're going to talk about how scholarships work now. First, scholarships fill unmet need. So that's what we're looking for. How much does a student really need for college? We'll also talk about how students can't be given more money than they need based on, so you can't be given more need-based aid than you have in need. You can't be given more than you need. And there are a few reasons for that. So again, there's not unlimited dollars. The federal government, the state of Maine, the colleges, they are not unlimitedly wealthy. That would be very nice. students. So there's got to be a way to make sure it's fair. So they're not giving students more need-based aid than they actually need. And then scholarships cannot replace that expected family contribution in most scenarios, and I'll talk about one scenario where they can to some degree, but for the most part, that expected family contribution stays the same no matter what. It's not changing. So that is still the expectation on the family. So I am going to say I'm not going to talk a lot about saving for college here in this presentation, but that's kind of the big takeaway when pulling this presentation together. And I know we talk about it a lot here at FAME. The more that families can save for college ahead of time, again, we know that parent assets play a really small role in the financial aid process as far as expected family contribution goes, but they can use those assets to pay for college, and it can make a huge difference in the student's ability to pay or what colleges they're able to choose from. So saving for college makes a huge difference because scholarships cannot replace, for the most part, that expected family contribution. That stays the same. So that one scenario that I was mentioning that is a little bit different is that it is possible that scholarships could replace your family contribution if the student is receiving no need-based aid from the college or the government. So if there's no need-based aid, we certainly hear of students who get full ride scholarships, right? So their entire cost for college is covered. How does that happen if they have an expected family contribution? Well, that's happening because those students are receiving no other need-based aid from the college or the federal government or their state government. So in those scenarios, it is all merit-based scholarships. So that is the only way, if you're willing to forego all of your need-based aid, that's the way that you can have scholarships cover your expected family contribution. And again, that's rare. We see that only in a small fraction of students that they're able to do this. So the majority of students need that need-based aid from their colleges and their government and need some additional aid. So let's talk about so scholarships fill your unmet need. So in this scenario, we've got our cost of college a little over $25,000 a year. We've got our expected family contribution of this family at $9,000. And we've got government grants and scholarships from the college or the federal or state government at $10,800. So what happens is you have the cost of the college. So this is usually advertised right on their website. So they'll have their cost of attendance on their website, and so you're able to see that. Then they immediately subtract the family's expected family contribution. So when a financial aid office is doing this, they're going to subtract that expected family contribution, then they're going to award their aid. So in this scenario, once all of that is done, that student has an unmet need of $6,000. So potentially this student can earn and apply up to $6,020 in scholarships without exceeding need. So this particular student, so we'll call that $6,000, that's the gap. We talk about these gaps in financial aid, and I was trying to find a statistic on like average gaps. I wasn't able to do that for you in time. If any of you guys have any stats out there about unmet need or average numbers on that, certainly send them my way. But in this scenario, so we're trying to fill $6,000 for the student. This is what they need. So they could earn up to $6,020 in scholarships. So in this same scenario, again, the same student, same EFC, same scholarships and grants, same unmet need. If that student does a really great job and is awarded $9,000 in outside scholarships, so they get this kind of nice chunk of money, maybe from one place or maybe from a number of different scholarships that they've applied for, all kind of put together. This results in an over award of $2,980. So in this case, it is likely the college will need to adjust the student's financial aid. We're going to talk in a second. It is possible to adjust the budget or the cost of attendance for the student, which can result in a larger unmet need. But in most scenarios, we're going to see that this particular student is likely going to have their financial aid package adjusted. This happens because the college cannot offer the student more need-based aid than they need. So again, it all has to work out, especially since most of the a lot of the need-based aid is coming from the federal government. So need-based aid programs like your federal Pell Grant, work study, or subsidized direct loans. So those are all need-based aid. So those are the things that the college will have to adjust. So how do they do that? So I do, again, want to send out a huge thank you to the colleges that worked with me this week to come up with some information. For the most part, I was going to list the colleges individually and how they each did it, but the reality is most of them did it exactly the same way. So I kind of summarized it all here. Colleges are applying outside scholarships to a student's financial aid package as soon as they learn of it. And this is important because one of the kind of regular things I heard was, let us know, make sure students are letting us know as soon as they receive those scholarships. The sooner you let the colleges know that you have received a scholarship, the earlier that they can look at your package and make adjustments and have conversations. You don't want to wait until the last minute. So one of the colleges mentioned that they have a program that, can detect later on in the school year. So September, October, November, once a student is on the college campus, they have ways to see that a scholarship was applied to your package that they didn't know about. And then they will retroactively go in and adjust your package, which can be really challenging for students if they're finding out halfway through the semester that they have that they're short some funds. So let colleges know as soon as possible. If the addition of the outside scholarship results in an over award, schools will adjust aid if the cost of attendance budget can't be increased. And again, we'll talk about that more in just a minute. Need-based student loans and work study were typically the first to be adjusted, then grants. And so actually most of them actually listed work study first. So I should have probably changed that around. So most of them are eliminating federal work study first, then looking at the need-based loans, so the subsidized portion of the student loan and just changing it to an unsubsidized loan. Then they're looking at usually school grant funds first, then then other types of grants. So that need-based student loan and work study. So this is where things can be, you can have a conversation with your colleges. So we'll talk about how to do that in a minute as well. So the colleges, most of them are doing it pretty much all the same way. I didn't see any colleges that, at least none of the list of colleges from Maine that replied to me, none of them are what I would call, they're not adjusting outside of your needs. They're at least allowing you to fill your unmet need with scholarships. I do know that there are some colleges throughout the US that we have seen in the past that, based on their own internal equations at their college, may adjust things a little bit differently and still leave students with a gap. But I did not see that at any of the colleges here in the state of Maine. So I think that works out really well for our students. So this is how colleges are kind of looking at those scholarships as they come in. As soon as they get the information, they are putting that into the package. If it results in an over award, then they'll potentially adjust your package. So if you see that that's happened, you can certainly give them a phone call, or you can call them as soon as you submit the notification of your scholarship. A couple of points of advice from colleges. First, inform your colleges of outside scholarships as soon as possible. So I think I mentioned that already. So as soon as you know, let the colleges know. This is interesting. Colleges would like a copy of that scholarship award letter because not only does it contain instructions for the student, but often it contains instructions for the financial aid office as well. So it might be how the scholarship is dispersed. So we're seeing, or the colleges were mentioning, there are some scholarships that are waiting for the students to make it through one semester of college successfully, and they have like successes determined based on that scholarship. So it's kind of scripted in there, and then that award can be dispersed second semester. So it's important to make sure that you're getting them a copy of that scholarship award letter. And then colleges are open to conversations about how funds are adjusted in the student's financial aid offer. So let's talk about that. So talking to your financial aid offices about award adjustments. One of the best things a student can do to maximize the amount of scholarships they are able to use to pay for college is begin by discussing with the college the student's cost of attendance. So there is a cost of attendance number listed on every college's website. It's usually on your financial aid notifications as well. But sometimes those numbers don't include all of the things an individual student might have to pay for. And we certainly know that some students have higher costs than others for all kinds of different reasons. So do you have additional costs that are not reflected in that cost of attendance? So are you taking more credits than the 15 credits that the college has determined as a full-time student and based in their cost of attendance? Are you taking 18 or more? Are your books, how much did they estimate for books? Are your books maybe a little bit more expensive than that for different reasons? Do you have higher transportation costs? So certainly if you are commuting to and from school and you're coming a distance, that might be in fact that you're paying more for that than other students. And do you have some medical expenses that are above and beyond? So those kinds of things a college can look at, a financial aid office can look at, and potentially increase that cost of attendance. Did you need a computer? Most colleges are not already plugging in the cost of a computer when you're in that cost for college, the cost of attendance. So if you purchased a computer for college, that could be something that could bring up that number. And does your degree program have any additional costs? And this is one that I saw with a lot of my students in the past, when they need specialized clothing or equipment, specific software for their degree program, especially if you are in an animation program, things like that, things that are not already in, that cost of attendance is based on the average student. The reality is there are some programs that don't have average costs. So talk to your financial aid office about increasing that cost of attendance. So letting them know about the things that you're paying for that might go above their cost of attendance number. Then once you've done that, so you are maximizing the amount of scholarships you can apply, then if aid must be adjusted, ask if loans or work study can be reduced first. And as we mentioned previously, we already know that that's one of the things that colleges in Maine are already doing for us. But this is where you get to have a little bit of say. And I worked with a student a few years back, and she had a work study job her freshman year, and she was working with one of her professors in her degree program and doing a job she really loved and really felt like not only was it going to be great for her as her work study position, but it was also going to look great on her resume and give her some connections. So her sophomore year, she won an outside scholarship, and work study was what the college adjusted. They took away her work study funds. Well, she was devastated. She had, I happened to run into her. We were talking about it, and we just had her give them a call. So she called the financial aid office at the college, let them know that she would like to keep her work study dollars, and they adjusted her student loans instead. So know that there are ways to have conversations with colleges. When I asked how colleges wanted to have those conversations, most of them said they'd like to have them in email. So starting with an email conversation, letting them know how you can be reached so that they can have a phone conversation if they need more information. But most of them are reflected they'd like to start with an email conversation to the financial aid office. So once a student has received scholarships, and they've applied them and they've made it through their school year, we're not done yet. So what is another thing that can potentially affect the student when it comes to scholarships? And that is taxes. So scholarships can be taxed if the scholarship exceeds the total is more than tuition fees, books, supplies, and required equipment. So what this means, if you notice, what's not included in that list is room and board. So room and, if you have a scholarship, if you have need-based aid that is covering more than tuition fees, books, supplies, and required equipment, then you will potentially have to pay taxes on that amount. So also, when a scholarship is specifically awarded just for room and board, so there are some scholarships out there that are just for kind of living on campus costs, those are all going to be taxable. So if they're being applied directly towards room and board, that is going to be taxable. We'll talk about it in a second. Or any portion of a scholarship that is used to cover room and board. So again, student loans and grant money, that's fine. That can cover room and board. But those scholarships need to be covering tuition, fees, books, supplies, and required equipment. So how is a student going to know if they need to pay taxes on their scholarship? So what's going to happen every year is they're going to get a 1098-T. This is a tuition statement. It comes from the college. On it, it is going to include payments received for qualified tuition and related expenses. So that'll be listed there. And then also the scholarships and grants. So if you can see box 5 on this tuition statement lists the scholarships and grants. So students do have to really take a look at what the cost of attendance is for the college around tuition, fees, books, supplies, so those kinds of things, those costs that are permitted, they need to know what that number is and need to make sure their scholarship number, or they need to check and see if their scholarship number goes above that number. If it does, any portion that goes above that amount is going to be taxable on their taxes that year. Now, if a student receives this 1098-T, it doesn't necessarily, that does not mean that they have to pay taxes. So in most cases, we're going to see that those scholarships do not exceed the cost. So I would say the vast majority of students are not paying taxes on their scholarships, but some of them are. The other thing that a 1098-T is used for is to track any credits you might, education credits you might get based on the money you paid to a college for qualified tuition and related expenses. So keep an eye out in January for your 1098-T so that you can kind of take a look at that. Keep track of the cost for books, supplies, and equipment. Those are the things that are not listed in the college's cost of attendance on their website specifically. So we can see exactly what you're billed for when it comes to, or you can actually look at your bill to look at tuition and fees, but books and supplies, those kinds of things you're often paying out of pocket for. So keep track of all of those so that you know exactly what your number is going to be. And if you're ever questioned, you've got proof that no, in fact, your expenses stayed below that number. And lastly, how can scholarship providers help? So this is really interesting because I had a family that was able to talk to their scholarship provider specifically because of this situation, and I really loved the conversation that they had. So these are the things that I think are probably the most helpful. First, and this is what this family did, they talked about adjusting the timing of the award. So this student was a great student, graduated from high school with some decent grades, got some really nice academic merit aid from different sources and some private scholarships. But they were all freshman year scholarships, so they weren't scholarships that lasted all 4 years. This student was able to talk to a college, this provider, about holding off on the scholarship until sophomore year. So the majority of their scholarships were applied for freshman year, and then that kind of bigger scholarship was applied for sophomore year when those freshman year scholarships were going to go away anyways. So that allowed that student to not kind of come into some of these challenges, so avoid some of them. Another thing that I thought was interesting, and when I was doing some research, is that scholarships can place the scholarship award, directly into a student's 529 account. So in actually thinking about this, a lot of the scholarships I've seen for younger students, so when we're awarding scholarships to middle school students or elementary school students, often it is a check going into a 529 account. So that is a contribution to a student's 529 account and doesn't count against the student when it comes to financial aid in the same way. And then it becomes the asset of the parent or the account owner. So that's how it'll show up on the FAFSA when it's placed into that account. So it does have some effect, but often a lot less. So those are two things that, if you're able to talk to that provider about the scholarship and kind of see if there are things you can do to make those adjustments. So that is the end of my presentation on kind of some of the challenges around scholarships today. I think I went a little over my prescribed 30 minutes. I do want to plug before I take some questions that next month, January 8th at 1 p.m., we will have 2020's first Wednesday webinar titled Verification, the Next Hurdle After the FAFSA. And that will be hosted by Nikki Vachon. So you can also find any of our Wednesday webinars. We record them all. You can find them on famain.com on the K-12 and Higher Education Professionals page. They're also all on our YouTube page as well. But definitely check out, if you haven't checked out the K-12 and Higher Ed Professionals page lately, it is worth taking a look. We have got tons of stuff there for you to look at. So it is worth kind of taking a peek and refreshing yourself about all the fabulous stuff we have on our website. So again, next month we'll start at 1 p.m. Okay, so I'm going to give you just one more minute for people to kind of pop any questions that you might have into the question box, and let us see. So just give you just, how do we, great question. Thank you, Sage. How do we sign up for the next webinar? So I was hoping to tell you that it was up on our website for you to sign up for already, but when I checked yesterday afternoon, it wasn't there, but I assume it will go up quickly because I think the person who puts up the webinar announcements is actually listening to me right now. So the link, on our website, so in the future, so in the next day or two, if you go to our website at famain.com, go to our events page, you're going to see all of our events listed, and I believe one of the few events for January listed will be that webinar. So you'll be able to click on that link and sign up for it. We also will send out an invitation to our general email list. So if you get emails from us on a regular basis, you'll get them. You'll get an invitation soon as well that way. So great. Any additional questions for me? Okay, got a few. Excellent. Okay, so our athletic scholarships handled differently than merit scholarships. So in essence, an athletic scholarship is a merit scholarship. So a merit scholarship is any scholarship a student gets for doing or being something special. If you've been to one of my presentations, you've heard this before. So being a great athlete is, you can earn merit scholarships for that. Now, we are typically used to seeing students receive academic merit scholarships. So it's they're handled, and they're awarded differently, but they're pretty much looked at the same way. That said, for some colleges, where we sometimes see some challenges is when some of these more elite athletes at big colleges are getting things paid for them by outside sources that are harder to track. So I know that becomes a bit of a challenge for some colleges, but ultimately, if you are receiving a benefit of free housing for playing a sport, that is a scholarship. So even though it's maybe looked at a little bit differently, it needs to be counted the same way when it comes to financial aid and those kinds of things. So I hope that answers your question, but it should be looked at the same way. What if the FAFSA and EFC isn't a clear picture of the family's income? Thank you for that one, Amy. So when you're filling out that FAFSA, the information you are putting in the FAFSA form is one moment in time, that moment you are sitting down. And in fact, the income information that a student is providing, by the time they get on a college campus, that income information is 2 years old. Things change. If a family's financial situation is different than what they're putting in the FAFSA, so as they're kind of plugging in that FAFSA information, they know that this isn't a really accurate picture. That's called a special circumstance. So in those cases, we would encourage students and families to contact their college financial aid offices and let them know what's going on. And college on their end can change a student's, well, EFC. The EFC from the federal government doesn't change, but internally at an individual college, that college can say, you qualify for more financial aid, so they can reduce your ability to pay on their end. The challenge with that is that you have to do it for every college that you're applying to. So, what one college does doesn't affect what another college does. So you have to do them all individually. Yes, Sage, we can put you on the email list. And can you go over the 529B and scholarship again? Okay. So can we go over how the 529 works when it comes to helping students that are receiving scholarships? So if a student receives a scholarship and they think that they're going to hit a point where they're getting more scholarship than meets their need, and certainly if they're getting them when they're younger. So if you have a student who's starting to be awarded scholarships as early as their freshman year in high school, having a conversation with a scholarship provider about potentially having their scholarship put into their 529 account versus just sending it directly to the college. I will say there are many scholarship providers who are not going to do that. The big reason is when money is deposited into a 529 account in that way, it becomes the property of the account owner. So in theory, any money put into a 529 account can also be pulled out of a 529 account. That said, if there's trust there, we certainly have seen, I'm very aware of a few scholarships that is exactly what they do, is put the money into a 529 account for the student. So that's a conversation that is going to make that money the property of the account owner, which is usually the parent. Again, parent assets play a really small role in the financial aid process, so it's looked at pretty, probably one of the best ways. Yeah. I hope that answers your question. I hope that spilling your coffee didn't affect your computer. Great. All right. I don't think I have any more. You guys have been a fantastic audience today. So again, keep in mind that we will have the next Wednesday webinar. Will happen in January, on January 8th at 1 p.m. Verification and the next hurdle after the FAFSA. That'll be hosted by Nikki Vachon. Again, I'm Jessica Whittier. I will send out an email a couple days from now with a link to the recorded webinar, as well as some additional links to some of our fantastic scholarship presentations. So thank you guys all, and I hope you have a fantastic end to this decade. Have a great day.